The morning air felt crisp against Olivia's face as she made her way deeper into Blackwood Forest. The sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, dappling the forest floor with light. As an environmental scientist who had spent the last 5 years studying this particular ecosystem, Olivia knew these woods better than most. Today was like any other field day. Clipboard in hand, sample containers in her backpack, and a mission to collect soil samples for her research on microbiome diversity. Her boots crunched over fallen leaves as she ventured off the main trail, following coordinates she'd marked for today's collection sites. The sounds of the forest enveloped her. Birdsong overhead, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and the gentle whisper of wind through the trees. This should be close enough, she muttered to herself, checking the GPS on her phone before tucking it away. She knelt on the soft ground and pulled out her collection tools, small trowel, labeled containers, and a digital probe to measure soil acidity. As Olivia worked, methodically collecting samples and making notes, something caught her eye. A flash of something unnatural, a glint of metal where there should be none, about 20 feet away near the base of an old oak tree. Curious, she packed her current sample and walked toward the unusual reflection. At first, she thought it might be trash, perhaps a discarded candy wrapper or aluminum can left by hikers, despite the forest being a protected area. But as she got closer, she realized it was something else entirely. "What in the world?" Olivia whispered, bending down to get a better look. Half buried in the soil and partially covered by fallen leaves was what appeared to be a toy truck, but unlike any toy she'd ever seen. It was tiny, no more than 3 inches long, with incredible detail that seemed impossible for its size. The miniature truck had rubber tires with actual treads, perfectly scaled windows, and what looked like functioning doors. The metallic red paint job was what had caught the sunlight and drawn her attention. Olivia gently picked it up, brushing away bits of soil that clung to its undercarriage. The weight of it surprised her. It felt substantial, made of metal rather than plastic. She turned it over in her hands, examining it from every angle. "This is bizarre," she said to herself. "Who would leave such a detailed model out here in the middle of nowhere?" The truck wasn't just a crude toy. It had tiny side mirrors, headlights with clear plastic covers, and even miniature windshield wipers. Olivia had a nephew who collected die-cast cars, but this was different. More like a perfect scale model created by a master craftsman. Her scientific curiosity piqued. Olivia began looking around the area more carefully. If there was one strange item here, perhaps there were others. She set the little truck down on a nearby stone and began carefully searching the ground, pushing aside leaves and twigs. Within minutes, her hunch proved correct. About 5 feet away, she found another vehicle, this time a small blue sedan with the same remarkable level of detail. Unlike the truck, this one was almost completely buried, with just a corner of the roof visible above the soil. Olivia's heart beat faster as she carefully excavated the second vehicle. The more she looked, the more she found. A yellow bus, a green tractor, a white ambulance with tiny red crosses painted on its sides. Each one was unique, made with the same incredible craftsmanship, and each was in a different state of burial, some just beneath leaves, others inches deep in the soil, as if they had been there for different lengths of time. "This doesn't make any sense," Olivia said, her voice barely audible as she laid out her discoveries on the flat stone. She counted 7 vehicles in total, arranged in what almost looked like a tiny parking lot. They varied in condition. Some appeared newer, while others showed signs of wear and exposure to the elements. Pulling out her phone, Olivia snapped several photos, making sure to include a ruler in the frame for scale. Then she took close-ups of each vehicle individually. As a scientist, her first instinct was to document everything meticulously. The whole situation felt surreal. Who would create such detailed miniatures only to bury them in a remote part of the forest? Was it some kind of art installation? A geocaching game? Or something else entirely? As she examined the vehicles more closely, Olivia noticed something that made her breath catch. The tiny truck, the first one she'd found, had what appeared to be mud caked in its wheel wells. But it wasn't the same soil as the forest floor where she'd found it. This mud was lighter in color, almost clay-like, whereas the Blackwood Forest soil was dark and rich with organic matter. "That's odd," she murmured, using the tip of her pencil to gently scrape at the dried mud. "This came from somewhere else." Even stranger, when she looked at the underside of the vehicle, she noticed what appeared to be wear patterns on the tires. Not the kind of damage that would come from being buried or exposed to the elements, but actual wear from use, as if these tiny vehicles had been driven. A chill ran up Olivia's spine despite the warm spring day. There was something deeply unsettling about these perfect little vehicles with signs of actual use. It defied logical explanation. She checked her watch. It was getting late, and she had barely started her soil collection for the day. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia decided to take the vehicles with her. She couldn't just leave them here, and she wanted to examine them more closely in her lab. Carefully, she wrapped each miniature in a tissue and placed them in separate compartments of her sample case. She marked the exact location on her GPS and made detailed notes about where each vehicle had been found. Before leaving, Olivia scanned the area once more, looking for anything she might have missed. That's when she noticed something else, a small clearing about 30 feet beyond where she'd found the vehicles. It wasn't natural. The ground there was flattened in geometric patterns with tiny pathways no more than an inch wide, crisscrossing the area. It almost looked like roads, Olivia whispered, kneeling down to look closer. The miniature pathways connected in a pattern that resembled streets in a tiny neighborhood. Some areas appeared packed down as if they were parking spaces or driveways. Her scientific mind raced with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. Was this an elaborate prank? Some kind of artistic statement about human encroachment on nature? Or had she stumbled upon something that defied conventional explanation? As the sunlight began to fade, casting longer shadows through the trees, Olivia reluctantly packed up her equipment. Her original research would have to wait. These strange discoveries demanded her attention now. On the hike back to her car, Olivia's mind whirled with questions. She'd been studying this forest for years and had never seen anything like this. The forest had always held secrets. That's what had drawn her to ecology in the first place, but this was different. This wasn't about natural mysteries, but something that hinted at human involvement, or perhaps something else entirely. Back at her car, Olivia carefully placed her sample case on the passenger seat. Through the plastic lid, she could see the tissue-wrapped shapes of the tiny vehicles. Even now, in the fading light of day, part of her wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. She started the engine but didn't immediately drive away. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and began writing down everything she remembered about the discovery while it was still fresh in her mind. The location, the condition of each vehicle, the strange road-like patterns in the clearing. As the forest darkened around her parked car, Olivia felt a mixture of excitement and unease. Tomorrow she would examine her finds under the microscope at the research station. Tomorrow she might have answers. Or perhaps, as often happened in science, she would only find more questions. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that her discovery would lead her down a path that would challenge everything she understood about the world around her. The tiny vehicles were just the beginning, and what she would learn about them in the days to come would change everything. As Olivia drove away from Blackwood Forest, the headlights of her car cutting through the gathering darkness, the little vehicles sat quietly in their tissue wrappings. If one had looked very, very closely in that moment, they might have noticed something impossible. The tiniest wisp of exhaust-like vapor escaping from the wrapped package, as if one of the miniature engines had just been shut off. But Olivia didn't notice. Not yet. That revelation would come later, along with many others that would reshape her understanding of the forest she thought she knew so well. For now, she was simply a scientist with an unusual discovery. 7 perfectly crafted miniature vehicles found buried in the woods. By this time tomorrow, she would begin to realize they were something much more significant than lost toys or art projects. They were evidence of something extraordinary, hiding in plain sight among the trees and shadows of Blackwood Forest. And somewhere, deep in the forest behind her, tiny headlights began to flicker on as darkness fell completely, and the night shift of the miniature world began its work. The fluorescent lights of the research station hummed overhead as Olivia carefully unwrapped the tissue-covered bundles on her workbench. It was just past 7 in the morning, and she'd arrived early, eager to examine her strange discoveries from yesterday's forest expedition. The station was quiet. Most of her colleagues wouldn't arrive for another hour or so, giving her some privacy with her unusual finds. One by one, She arranged the 7 miniature vehicles in a row. In the harsh laboratory light, they looked even more extraordinary than they had in the forest. The level of detail was astonishing. Tiny door handles that actually seemed to turn, miniature side mirrors that folded in, and headlights with clear plastic covers that looked like they might actually illuminate. Okay. Little mysteries, Olivia said quietly, pulling her microscope closer. Let's see what you're really made of. She selected the red truck first, the initial vehicle that had caught her attention in the forest. Under the microscope's lowest power, the truck's craftsmanship became even more impressive. The paint job wasn't just a simple coating but had depth and texture, with a clear coat over the base color. The windows weren't just painted on but were actual transparent material set into the frame. Olivia whistled softly. This is incredible workmanship. She increased the magnification and focused on the underside of the truck. What she saw made her sit back in surprise. The undercarriage wasn't just a solid piece of metal as she'd expected. There were tiny mechanical components, springs, axles, and what appeared to be a miniature engine block, all perfectly scaled. That's not possible, she muttered, adjusting the focus. Nobody makes toy cars with actual working mechanical parts at this scale. More puzzling still, when she examined the dried mud in the wheel wells under the microscope, she confirmed her initial suspicion. It didn't match the soil composition of Blackwood Forest. This soil had a higher clay content and contained mineral fragments not found in her research area. Olivia spent the next 2 hours methodically examining each vehicle, taking detailed notes and photographs through the microscope. Each one revealed the same impossible level of detail and engineering. The ambulance had tiny gurney tracks inside. The bus had individual seats visible through its windows. The tractor had a 3-point hitch that seemed like it could actually move. When she tried to open the hood of the blue sedan, something even stranger happened. It actually opened, revealing a perfectly scaled engine compartment with what appeared to be a functioning motor inside, complete with miniature hoses and wiring. This isn't mass-produced, she said aloud to the empty lab. This isn't even possible with current manufacturing technology. Olivia was so absorbed in her examination that she jumped when a voice spoke behind her. Early bird gets the worm, huh? What's got you so captivated? She turned to see Thomas, one of the other environmental researchers at the station, standing in the doorway with a coffee mug in hand. Oh, morning, she said, unconsciously shifting to partially block his view of the vehicles. Something made her reluctant to share her discovery just yet. Just looking at some unusual items I found during yesterday's sampling. Thomas walked over anyway, curiosity evident on his face. Are those toy cars? He asked, peering over her shoulder. Seeing no way to hide them now, Olivia stepped aside. They're not toys, at least not ordinary ones. I found them buried in the soil about 3 miles into the northwest section of the forest. Thomas picked up the yellow bus, examining it with interest. Wow, these are detailed. My kid would love these. He turned it over in his fingers. Heavy too, what are they made of? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Olivia said, taking the bus back perhaps a bit too quickly. The metal doesn't match any standard toy material I'm familiar with. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You're running a metallurgical analysis on toy cars you found in the woods? That's thorough, he smiled. You know what these probably are, right? Geocaching items. Geocaching? Olivia repeated, though she was familiar with the outdoor treasure hunting game. Sure. People hide containers with trinkets for others to find using GPS coordinates. These look like high-end collectibles someone left as a prize. That would explain why they were buried in the middle of nowhere. Thomas sipped his coffee. Mystery solved. You can thank me later, he added with a grin. Olivia forced a smile. Maybe. But why would someone leave valuable collectibles? And how do you explain the different soil composition in the tire treads, or the fact that they show signs of actual use? Thomas shrugged. People are weird. Maybe they drove them through some mud first to make them look used as part of the game. Anyway, I've got samples waiting for me. See you at the staff meeting later. After he left, Olivia sat staring at the vehicles, unconvinced by Thomas's explanation. Geocaching made logical sense, but it didn't account for the impossibly detailed engineering or the signs of actual use. And it certainly didn't explain the tiny road system she'd found in the clearing. By lunchtime, Olivia had scraped samples from each vehicle and run them through the lab's portable spectrometer. The results only deepened the mystery. The metal composition didn't match any standard alloy in the database. It contained elements commonly found in high-grade steel, but in configurations she'd never seen before. As the day progressed, Olivia found herself growing increasingly protective of her discoveries. When other colleagues entered the lab, she casually covered the vehicles with a cloth, making vague references to soil samples when asked what she was working on. That evening, instead of heading home, Olivia loaded her backpack with equipment, her night vision trail camera, motion sensors, a higher quality digital camera, and a small tent. If Thomas was right about geocaching, someone might come to retrieve or check on the items. And if he wasn't right, well, Olivia needed to know what was really going on in that forest clearing. The drive back to Blackwood Forest was quiet, with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. As Olivia hiked back to the location where she'd found the vehicles, she replayed the day's discoveries in her mind. The miniature motor inside the blue sedan, the unfamiliar metal alloy, the tiny roads in the clearing. None of it made conventional sense. When she reached the site, the forest was beginning to darken under the canopy of trees. Using her GPS coordinates, she found the exact spot where she'd discovered the vehicles. The small depression where the red truck had been remained visible in the soil. Olivia moved carefully to the clearing with the tiny road system she'd noticed yesterday. In the fading light, she could see that something had changed. New tracks had appeared in the soil, as if the tiny roads had been used since her last visit. "Someone's been here," she whispered, though another part of her mind suggested a far more improbable explanation. Working quickly before darkness fell completely, Olivia set up her equipment. She mounted the trail camera on a tree trunk facing the clearing, positioning it to capture any movement. She placed motion sensors at what appeared to be entry points to the tiny road system. Finally, she set up her small one-person tent about 50 feet away, partially hidden by underbrush but with a clear line of sight to the area. Inside her tent, Olivia connected her laptop to a receiver that would alert her if the motion sensors were triggered. She intended to stay awake and keep watch, but the long day of scientific puzzles and excitement had taken its toll. Despite her determination, her eyelids grew heavy as the forest settled into the quiet sounds of night. She woke with a start sometime later. Her watch showed 2:17 a.m. Something had pulled her from sleep. A sound, a feeling, she wasn't sure. The laptop screen glowed in the darkness, showing no alerts from the motion sensors. Yet something felt different. Olivia slipped out of her sleeping bag and crawled to the tent opening. Peering out into the moonlit forest, she held her breath and listened. At first she heard nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of an active nighttime ecosystem. Then, just as she was about to retreat back inside, she heard it, a faint humming sound, mechanical, rhythmic, coming from the direction of the clearing. Heart pounding. She grabbed her flashlight but didn't turn it on yet. Moving as quietly as possible, Olivia crept from her tent toward the clearing, using the moonlight to guide her steps. As she got closer, the humming grew slightly louder, though it was still barely audible. It reminded her of distant machinery or perhaps the sound of tiny engines. At the edge of the clearing, Olivia crouched behind a fallen log and peered over. In the silver moonlight, she could make out movement on the tiny roads, small shapes moving in orderly patterns. The rational part of her mind suggested it might be night insects or small nocturnal forest creatures. But deep down, she knew it was something else entirely. With trembling fingers, Olivia raised her flashlight and, after a moment's hesitation, switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing, and for a split second, before the tiny sounds changed from humming to alarmed squeaking, before the small moving shapes scattered like startled ants, Olivia saw them. Tiny vehicles, moving on their own, without drivers. The clearing fell instantly silent and still. But Olivia had seen enough to know that her investigation had just taken a turn into territory no scientific training had prepared her for. Whatever these vehicles were, wherever they came from, she was now certain of one thing. They weren't just detailed models. They were something much more extraordinary. And somehow she knew her discovery was just the beginning. Olivia barely slept after what she'd witnessed in the clearing. She spent the remaining hours until dawn huddled in her tent, replaying the scene in her mind, the tiny vehicles moving independently across their miniature road system, the mechanical humming, the way they scattered when her flashlight beam hit them. It defied every scientific principle she knew, yet she couldn't deny what she'd seen with her own eyes. When the first light of morning filtered through the trees, Olivia emerged from her tent and approached the clearing cautiously. The tiny road showed fresh tracks, but there was no sign of movement now. She checked her trail camera, eager to see if it had captured anything overnight. The memory card held several video clips triggered by motion. With shaking hands, Olivia connected the camera to her tablet and played the first recording. Most showed nothing unusual, a raccoon wandering past, leaves rustling in the night breeze. But the clip timestamped at 2:13 a.m. made her breath catch. In the grainy night vision footage, tiny headlights moved across the clearing. The vehicles, at least 3 of them, traveled along the miniature roads with purpose. They paused at intersections, made turns, and one even appeared to be pushing something like a small cart. There were no visible drivers or operators. The vehicles simply drove themselves. "This is impossible," Olivia whispered, but the evidence was right there on her screen. After carefully packing up her equipment, she made one final scan of the area. Something about the clearing had been nagging at her since yesterday, something beyond the tiny roads and mysterious vehicles. Now in the morning light, she realized what it was. The vegetation here was different from the surrounding forest, healthier, more vibrant. Plants that typically wouldn't thrive in this ecosystem were flourishing in perfect little patches. Olivia knelt to examine a cluster of wildflowers that shouldn't have been blooming for another month. Their roots connected to an elaborate system of tiny irrigation channels, barely visible beneath the soil surface. As a scientist who had studied this forest for years, she recognized this wasn't natural growth. These plants were being cultivated. Back at the research station, Olivia found herself reluctant to share her findings with her colleagues. Thomas's geocaching explanation seemed laughably inadequate now, but the truth was so fantastic she feared ridicule or worse, concerns about her mental stability. Instead, she downloaded the camera footage to her personal laptop and continued her investigation alone. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. The areas where she'd found the vehicles showed unusual biological markers: accelerated plant growth, increased insect activity, and soil composition that was subtly different from the surrounding forest. It was as if something or someone was deliberately modifying the ecosystem in small, targeted ways. Wildlife seemed drawn to these areas too. Trail cameras throughout the forest showed animals frequently visiting the spots where Olivia had found evidence of the tiny vehicles. Deer lingered there longer. Birds nested in unusual density. Even predators like foxes and owls seemed to respect these spaces rather than hunt in them. "It's like they know," Olivia murmured to herself as she reviewed the footage, "like they recognize these areas as special somehow." A week after her initial discovery, Olivia decided to broaden her investigation. If these mysterious vehicles were modifying the forest environment, perhaps there were records of similar phenomena. She began researching local history, scouring newspaper archives and regional folklore. Most leads went nowhere. Typical stories about UFO sightings or cryptid encounters that had been debunked years ago. But one article from a local paper dated 40 years earlier caught her attention. It described the unsolved disappearance of a 10-year-old girl who had vanished while playing in Blackwood Forest. The girl's father reported that before her disappearance, she had spoken of tiny people living in the woods who drove little cars and trucks. The authorities had dismissed her stories as childish imagination and focused their search on more conventional explanations. The girl was never found. The father's name was Harold Whitman. Olivia's research revealed that Harold still lived in the area, a reclusive retired engineer in a small house at the edge of the forest. Despite her scientific skepticism, the connection was too strong to ignore. The next morning, she drove to the address listed in the public records. The house was modest but well-maintained, with a workshop visible behind it. An elderly man with white hair was tending to a garden filled with native plant species, many of the same varieties Olivia had noticed thriving in those special areas of the forest. "Mr. Whitman?" Olivia called as she approached the fence. "Harold Whitman? My name is Olivia Reed. I'm an environmental scientist studying Blackwood Forest. I was hoping to ask you a few questions." The man straightened slowly, studying her with pale blue eyes that remained sharp despite his age. "Questions about what exactly?" His tone was guarded but not unfriendly. Olivia hesitated. If she mentioned tiny vehicles or self-driving miniature trucks, he might dismiss her immediately. Instead, she said, "About the forest ecosystem. I've noticed some unusual growth patterns in certain areas, and I understand you've lived here for many years. Your insights would be valuable." Harold nodded slowly. "I suppose I could spare some time. Come around to the porch. I'll get us some iced tea." As they sat on wooden chairs facing the forest, Harold spoke knowledgeably about the local ecosystem, the changes he'd observed over decades, and the conservation efforts he'd participated in. Olivia listened attentively but found herself struggling to direct the conversation toward what she really wanted to know. Finally, after nearly an hour of pleasant but ultimately unsatisfying conversation, Olivia decided to take a risk. She reached into her bag and carefully removed the red truck, the first of the vehicles she'd discovered. "Mr. Whitman, I actually came here because I found this in the forest," she said, placing it on the small table between them, "and several others like it." The change in the old man was immediate and profound. The color drained from his face. His hand reaching for his glass of tea froze midair. For a long moment he stared at the tiny vehicle as if he'd seen a ghost. "Where did you find this?" he whispered, voice suddenly hoarse. "In a clearing about 3 miles into the northwestern section of the forest," Olivia replied, watching his reaction carefully. There were 7 vehicles in total, and evidence of activity. Harold's eyes, when they finally lifted to meet hers, were filled with a mixture of emotions, shock, disbelief, and something that looked remarkably like hope. "They're still there," he said, more to himself than to Olivia. "After all this time, they're still there." "Mr. Whitman," Olivia said gently, "I know about your daughter, about Emily. I read about her disappearance." The old man nodded slowly, picking up the tiny truck with trembling fingers. He turned it over carefully, examining it with the practiced eye of an engineer. "Nobody believed her," he said quietly. "Nobody believed either of us. They said she had an overactive imagination, that I was a grieving father clutching at straws, but Emily wasn't making things up." "What exactly did she tell you?" Olivia asked. Harold set the truck down carefully and looked out toward the forest. "She called them the little people, said they needed help building a new home because their old one was being destroyed. She'd bring them things, thimbles for water storage, bits of wire, tiny scraps of fabric." He paused, lost in memory. "The day before she disappeared, she showed me one of their vehicles, just like this one. I thought she'd made it herself, though I couldn't figure out how. She was clever with crafts, but this was beyond her abilities." Olivia leaned forward. "And the day she disappeared? She told me the little people had invited her to see their home," Harold said, his voice cracking slightly. "I told her not to go into the forest alone. I had work that day. I was designing industrial equipment back then. When I came home, she was gone. We searched for weeks. I tried to tell the police about the tiny vehicles, the little people, but..." He shook his head. "You can imagine how that went." Olivia nodded sympathetically. "Mr. Whitman, I need to show you something." She pulled out her tablet and played the night vision footage of the tiny vehicles moving on their own. As he watched, tears filled the old man's eyes. "It's them," he whispered. "After 40 years, it's really them. Do you remember where exactly Emily said she met these little people?" Olivia asked. Harold wiped his eyes. Yes, I do." It was her special place. She called it the Hollow Tree. "I can show you where it is." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Harold looked directly at Olivia. "You believe me, don't you? You've seen enough to know I'm not crazy, that Emily wasn't making things up." Olivia thought of the moving vehicles, the cultivated plants, the precisely engineered road systems, and the impossible mechanical details of the miniature trucks and cars. "Yes, Mr. Whitman," she said. "I believe you. And tomorrow I'd like you to show me the Hollow Tree." Morning dew still clung to the grass as Olivia pulled up to Harold's house the next day. Despite the early hour, the elderly man was already waiting on his porch, dressed in sturdy hiking clothes with a small backpack at his feet. The years seemed to have fallen away from him overnight, replaced by a nervous energy that made him look a decade younger. "I couldn't sleep," he explained as he climbed into her car, kept thinking about those vehicles, about Emily. He clutched a faded paper map in his weathered hands. "I've marked the location of the Hollow Tree. It's not on any official trail." The drive to the forest edge was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. For Harold, this journey was reopening wounds that had never fully healed. For Olivia, it was a step beyond the boundaries of conventional science into something she couldn't yet define. They parked where the road ended and continued on foot. Harold moved with surprising agility for his age, navigating the increasingly dense forest with the confidence of someone who had walked these paths countless times before. Emily found the hollow tree when she was 7, he said as they hiked. It became her special place. She'd spend hours here, especially after her mother passed. He paused, ducking under a low-hanging branch. I should have paid more attention when she started talking about the little people. Maybe if I had... Olivia touched his arm gently. You couldn't have known. After nearly an hour of hiking, they reached an area where the forest grew particularly dense. Old growth trees towered overhead, their massive canopies filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Harold slowed his pace, looking around with careful attention. It should be right around here, he murmured, more to himself than to Olivia. It's been so many years, but I remember it was near that distinctive rock formation. They circled the area twice before Olivia spotted it, an ancient oak tree with a massive hollow at its base, partially hidden by undergrowth. The opening was about 4 feet tall, large enough for a child to enter comfortably but requiring an adult to stoop. That's it, Harold whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That's Emily's tree. As they approached, Olivia noticed tiny pathways leading to and from the hollow, similar to the miniature roads she'd found near the vehicles, but older and more established. Around the base of the tree, the same unusual plant growth was evident, flowers blooming out of season, ferns with patterns she'd never seen in this forest before. These plants, Harold said, kneeling to examine a cluster of unusual blue flowers. Emily used to bring these home, said they were medicine for the little people. Olivia crouched beside the hollow entrance. Years of forest debris had partially filled the opening, but it was still accessible. She flicked on her flashlight and peered inside. There's a larger space within, she reported. The tree is hollow for several feet up. She hesitated, then looked back at Harold. Should we go in? The old man nodded, his jaw set with determination. I've waited 40 years for answers. I'm not stopping now. Olivia went first, crawling through the opening and into the hollow core of the ancient oak. Harold followed more slowly, wincing as his knees protested the awkward position. Inside, they found a space large enough for both to sit comfortably. Olivia's flashlight revealed walls that had been smoothed and expanded beyond the tree's natural hollow. Someone's been maintaining this space, she said, running her hand along the surprisingly even interior surface. Emily, Harold whispered, looking around with wonder. This was her clubhouse. As Olivia's flashlight beam swept the interior, it caught something metallic gleaming from a small niche about eye level in the wood. She reached up and carefully extracted a small metal box, tarnished with age but still intact. It was a child's pencil case with faded butterfly stickers on the lid. That was hers, Harold said, voice breaking. She carried it everywhere. With trembling hands, Olivia opened the box. Inside was a small notebook with a worn leather cover, a child's ID bracelet, and several tiny tools that looked like they'd been carefully crafted from paper clips and bits of metal. Harold stared at the contents, tears streaming down his face. Her journal. She wrote everything in that little book. And that bracelet, I gave it to her for her 9th birthday. Olivia handed him the bracelet, which he cradled in his palm like it was made of glass. She carefully opened the journal. Its pages yellowed but preserved in the relative protection of the metal box and tree hollow. The first pages contained typical entries of a young girl, descriptions of school days, drawings of animals, complaints about chores, but about halfway through the entries changed. Detailed sketches of tiny vehicles appeared, along with notes in a child's handwriting describing the little people and their amazing machines. Olivia read aloud from one entry dated just a few weeks before Emily's disappearance. Today I met the builder. He's in charge of making all the vehicles and machines. He showed me how they turn flower sap into fuel. It's amazing. They can make cars smaller than my thumb that run just like real ones. I brought him some wire from Dad's workshop. He was so happy. Harold wiped his eyes. She was always bringing bits of things into the forest. I thought she was just playing. The entries continued, describing a community of tiny beings, no more than 2 inches tall, who had come to the forest seeking refuge. According to Emily's journal, They were fleeing the destruction of their previous home due to human development. They had technology far beyond their size, including the ability to modify plants and create sophisticated machines. As Olivia turned to the final pages of the journal, her heart raced. The last entry, dated the day of Emily's disappearance, read, "The council has invited me to visit their main city. It's deep underground beneath the old oak roots. They say no human has ever seen it before. The builder says they have a way to make me small enough to fit through their tunnels just for a little while. I'm going tomorrow after school. I can't wait to see everything up close." Below this was a childish drawing of what appeared to be a miniature city, with domed buildings and tiny vehicles moving along intricate roadways. Harold's hands shook as he took the journal from Olivia. "She wasn't taken," he whispered. "She went willingly." Olivia's scientific mind raced with questions. But how could they possibly shrink a human child? "It's physically impossible." As if in answer, her flashlight beam caught something else in the hollow, a thin seam in the wood at the base of the tree. Looking closer, Olivia realized it was a tiny door, no more than 3 inches high, expertly camouflaged against the wood grain. And next to it, barely visible, was a small lever mechanism. "Harold," she said quietly, "look at this." The old engineer leaned forward, examining the tiny door with professional interest despite his emotional state. "Incredible craftsmanship," he murmured. "The mechanism looks like, it's almost like a miniature airlock system." Before Olivia could respond, they heard a soft mechanical whirring. The tiny door was opening. Both froze, watching in astonishment as the small portal swung inward, revealing a dimly lit tunnel beyond. Then, from within the passage, a tiny vehicle emerged, a sleek silver car unlike the more utilitarian models Olivia had found previously. It stopped just outside the door, its headlights illuminating the interior of the hollow tree. A moment later, something else emerged from the doorway, a small humanoid figure standing just under 2 inches tall. It wore what appeared to be a uniform of some kind and carried a tiny device in its hands. The being stopped beside the vehicle, regarding the two humans with what seemed like caution rather than fear. Harold made a choked sound. "Just like Emily described," he whispered. The tiny figure made an adjustment to the device it carried. A moment later, a small but clearly audible voice filled the hollow. "You have found her journal," the figure said. The voice was feminine but mechanical, as if processed through a translation device. "You are the father, and you," it turned toward Olivia. "You are the one who discovered our transport vehicles." Olivia could barely breathe. "Yes," she managed. What are you?" "We are the conservators," the tiny being replied. "Your daughter called us the little people. We came to this forest when our home was destroyed by human expansion. Emily helped us establish our new colony." "Where is she?" Harold asked, voice cracking. Is she still alive?" The tiny figure was silent for a moment. Then, "Emily made a choice. She wished to understand our world completely. We offered her transformation, a permanent reduction in physical size to join our community. She accepted." Harold's face went pale. "You're saying my daughter is still alive, but tiny like you?" "She is honored among us," the figure said. "She has helped build the bridge between our worlds. She is our human ambassador." "Can I see her?" Harold asked desperately. "Please. It's been 40 years." The figure seemed to consult with someone through a small device on its wrist. After a brief exchange in a language neither human could understand, it looked back up at them. "Return tomorrow at sunset. Come alone. Both of you. We will prepare a meeting." The figure gestured to Emily's journal. "Bring that. It is part of our shared history." Before either could ask another question, the tiny being returned to its vehicle, which quickly reversed into the doorway. The small portal closed seamlessly behind it, once again becoming nearly invisible against the wood grain. Olivia and Harold sat in stunned silence for several minutes, the only sound their ragged breathing and the distant calls of forest birds. 40 years, Harold finally whispered. "All this time she's been here, living among them, just inches away from our world." Olivia placed her hand on his shoulder, words failing her. The scientist in her struggled to process what they'd witnessed, while the human in her felt the weight of Harold's decades of grief and newfound hope. "We'll come back tomorrow," she promised. "We'll see her." As they carefully exited the hollow tree, the forest around them suddenly seemed alive with new meaning. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every unusual plant, every perfectly formed tiny pathway now hinted at an entire civilization living alongside their own. Invisible to most humans, but thriving in their carefully tended ecological niches. And somewhere within that hidden world was a girl named Emily, who had chosen to become something extraordinary. The 24 hours before their return to the hollow tree passed with excruciating slowness. Olivia spent the day in her apartment, meticulously cleaning Emily's journal with the gentle techniques she'd learned for handling delicate field specimens. Harold called twice, his voice alternating between excitement and disbelief, asking if she thought they were making a mistake in believing what they'd seen. "I'm a scientist, Harold," Olivia had reminded him. "I believe in what I can observe and document." And we both saw that tiny being with our own eyes. As the appointed time approached, Olivia picked up Harold in her car. The elderly man clutched a small paper bag in his hands. "What's that?" she asked as they drove toward the forest. "Photos," he replied quietly. "Of Emily, of our family. And this?" He pulled out a tiny handmade bracelet of colored thread. "She made one for me before she disappeared. Said it was a friendship bracelet. I thought, if it really is her, she might remember." The forest seemed different as they hiked toward the hollow tree, more alive somehow now that they knew its secret. Every rustling leaf, every flicker of movement in the undergrowth took on new meaning. Were they being watched by tiny eyes? Were miniature sentries tracking their approach? They reached the hollow tree just as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays through the canopy. Without discussion, both knew to wait outside rather than enter uninvited. Harold paced nervously while Olivia set up a small portable light that would allow them to see once darkness fell. As the last direct sunlight faded from the forest floor, a soft blue glow emerged from within the hollow tree. Olivia and Harold exchanged glances, then carefully approached the opening and peered inside. The interior had been transformed. The tiny door at the base was now fully open, and from it emanated the blue light. Miniature spotlights had been placed around the hollow's interior, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. A small platform had been constructed in the center of the space, raised about 6 inches off the ground. "They've been preparing," Olivia whispered, her scientific mind racing to catalog every detail of this impossible scenario. "Should we go in?" Harold asked, his voice trembling with anticipation. Before Olivia could answer, a procession of tiny vehicles emerged from the doorway at the tree's base. Unlike the utility vehicles she'd found in the forest, these were elegant and ceremonial, with polished surfaces that caught and reflected the blue light. They formed a circle around the raised platform, headlights pointing inward. A voice spoke from somewhere near the platform, the same feminine, slightly mechanical voice they'd heard the day before. "Please enter and be seated. Lower yourselves carefully." Olivia went first, crawling through the opening and sitting cross-legged near the platform but leaving enough space for Harold. The elderly man followed, moving slowly and with obvious emotion as he settled beside her. From the tiny doorway emerged what appeared to be a delegation. 6 small figures, dressed in different colored uniforms that seemed to denote rank or function, walked in formation toward the platform. They carried what looked like scientific instruments and communication devices. "We are the Council of Conservators," announced the figure in front, the same one they had met yesterday. "I am Chief Science Officer Lyra. We have governed our community in this forest for 43 of your years." Harold leaned forward. "And Emily? Is she really here?" Lyra made a gesture, and one of the tiny vehicles, larger than the others with a clear dome top, rolled forward from the doorway. It stopped at the edge of the platform and the dome slid open. A small figure emerged, barely 2 inches tall but unmistakably human in proportion. She wore what looked like a researcher's outfit in miniature, with tiny tools attached to a belt around her waist. Her hair, once blonde according to the photos Olivia had seen, was now silver-white, and her face showed the gentle lines of middle age. Harold made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Emily?" The tiny woman looked up, shielding her eyes against the comparative brightness of Olivia's lamp. When she spoke, her voice was projected through the same translation system as Lyra's, but the tone was unmistakably human. "Dad? Is that really you?" For several moments, neither could speak. Harold's hand shook as he leaned closer, trying to see the daughter he'd lost 40 years ago in this tiny adult figure. "It's me, Butterfly," he said, using what must have been a childhood nickname. I never stopped looking for you. Emily climbed onto a small elevated platform that brought her to better viewing height. I wanted to contact you so many times, she said, her amplified voice catching with emotion. But the council thought it was too risky. Human knowledge of our existence could threaten everything we've built here. What happened to you? Harold asked. That last day, your journal said they could make you small enough to visit, but just for a little while. Emily nodded. That was the original plan. The conservators have technology that can temporarily alter physical size through molecular compression. I was supposed to visit their main settlement for just a few hours, then return to normal size. But during my visit, there was an accident at their primary facility. Lyra stepped forward. Our compression technology was damaged. We could not reverse the process within the safe time window. Emily was faced with a terrible choice. I could either remain compressed permanently, Emily continued, or risk molecular destabilization if they attempted to return me to normal size after the window had closed. They were honest about the risks. I chose to stay. Harold wiped tears from his eyes. You were only 10 years old. How could you make such a decision? Emily's tiny shoulders straightened. I was young, but I understood enough. And Dad, I'd found something amazing here. A whole civilization living in harmony with nature. Their technology, their knowledge. It was like nothing in our world. I was scared, but also excited by the possibility of becoming part of it. And after, why not contact me? Let me know you were alive? Harold's voice cracked with decades of pain. The council voted against it, Emily explained. They feared exposure. But I never forgot you. I documented everything about our family, our home. I became the conservators' human expert, helping them understand the larger world around them. Olivia, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Your daughter became their bridge between worlds, she told Harold. That's why the vehicles I found looked so, well, human. She helped design them, didn't she? Emily nodded. I brought my knowledge of human engineering. Dad, remember how you used to let me watch you design industrial equipment? Those lessons weren't wasted. I've spent 40 years applying them here, helping the conservators build a sustainable community. Lyra gestured around them. Emily has been invaluable to our survival. When we fled our original home, a protected valley that was destroyed for a human housing development, we had lost much of our infrastructure. With her help, we adapted to this forest ecosystem. The plants, Olivia realized. The unusual growth patterns I've been observing, that's your work too? Botanical engineering is one of our specialties, Lyra explained. We modify plants to serve multiple functions: food sources, building materials, natural barriers against predators, and environmental restoration. The forest areas under our care are 47% more biodiverse than surrounding regions. Harold seemed barely to hear this exchange. His eyes remained fixed on his daughter. Emily, he said softly, I brought something for you. With trembling hands, he removed the small friendship bracelet from his pocket and gently placed it on the platform beside her. Emily walked over to it, placing her tiny hand on the colorful threads. You kept it all this time? I kept everything, Harold whispered. For the next hour, father and daughter shared 4 decades of separate lives. Emily told of her work with the conservators, her adaptation to life at a fraction of human size, and eventually her marriage to one of their engineers. Harold shared the story of his grief, his continued search, and how he had never given up hope of finding answers. Throughout their reunion, Olivia spoke quietly with Lyra and the other council members, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her disbelief. The conservators explained their mission: to preserve ecosystems through microscale intervention, working below the threshold of human awareness. Our people have existed alongside humans for millennia, Lyra explained. Always hidden, always careful. Only rarely do we reveal ourselves, and only to those we believe will protect our secret. As the night deepened, Emily finally addressed the question hanging in the air. Dad, Olivia, now that you know about us, what will you do? Harold looked to Olivia. As a scientist, she had a professional obligation to document and share discoveries. This could be the most significant finding in human history, an intelligent civilization living undetected within our own world. But she also understood the implications. Exposure would mean the end of the conservators' way of life. Their carefully balanced existence would be destroyed by human curiosity, fear, or greed. Your community is actively improving the forest ecosystem, Olivia said slowly. As an environmental scientist, my job is to protect biodiversity and promote ecological health. Exposing you would work against everything I've dedicated my life to. She made her decision. The areas where you work, I'll designate them as special research zones. Protected areas with limited access, officially for studying rare fungal and plant species. It will give you a buffer zone, keep other researchers away. Emily's tiny face showed profound relief. And you, Dad? Harold smiled through his tears. I found you. That's all I ever wanted. Your secret is safe with me. As they prepared to leave, Emily presented them with a gift, a perfectly crafted miniature vehicle unlike the others Olivia had found. A communication device, she explained. If you place it in the hollow tree and activate this switch, it will alert me. We can meet again. Outside, as they walked back through the moonlit forest, Harold seemed transformed. The weight of 40 years of uncertainty lifted from his shoulders. She's alive, he kept saying. My little girl is alive and has lived an entire life. Olivia understood that her discovery had evolved into something far greater than scientific breakthrough. She had witnessed the reunion of a father and daughter separated by an impossible circumstance, and the revelation of an entire civilization living in symbiosis with the world she studied. In the days that followed, Olivia began the process of establishing the protected research areas. Her colleagues were puzzled by her sudden interest in fungal conservation, but her reputation ensured the necessary permissions were granted. Harold visited his daughter regularly, bringing tiny books and family photos that the conservator's technology could reduce to Emily's scale. Olivia joined him occasionally, learning more about the remarkable achievements of the tiny civilization and incorporating their botanical innovations without revealing their source into her research. The tiny vehicles continued to move through the forest at night, now occasionally venturing near Olivia when she worked alone in the woods. She became the conservator's second human ally, using her scientific influence to protect the ecosystem they all called home. What had begun with the discovery of a tiny truck in the forest had changed everything, not just for Olivia and Harold, but for the way Olivia understood the world itself. The boundary between the possible and impossible had shifted, revealing layers of life and consciousness existing just beyond ordinary human perception. And sometimes, when the forest was quiet and the light was just right, Olivia would catch glimpses of tiny headlights moving among the trees and smile at the secret world she had promised to protect.